When a CEO hires me, there's really just one thing they want to know. What's going on with my business? That's why I built this Excel dashboard. It gives you all of your key metrics at a glance and tells you whether your business is thriving or in trouble. And in this Excel masterclass, I'll show you exactly how to build this dashboard from scratch. We'll cover the design process, the essential metrics and benchmarks to track like a CFO, the formulas that make everything dynamic, and 2 of my favorite Excel tricks to make your numbers pop. So let's get started with building our dashboard. All right, so here I have my Excel file, and I actually just created this little matrix here to help me understand all the colors that I'll be using. And to set these colors, you can just click this little paint icon, go to more colors, and then click on custom, and then enter in the hex code over here. So this would be a good cheat sheet as we build out our dashboard. And the first thing that I'm gonna do, let's just set a background color to my spreadsheet. So I'm gonna choose this one right over here. And then the next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select columns A all the way through column AL. And I'm gonna set the width over here by clicking on column width. And we're gonna set that to 2.89. Perfect. Okay, now let's select the actual dashboard area. So I'm gonna select cell B1 all the way through AL35. And we're gonna make it this other color to give it a little bit of contrast as such. Excellent, now let's start outlining the header. So I'll call this Executive Financial Dashboard. And let's just zoom in a bit. All right, this is gonna be our company name. And now let's start outlining the section where the status is gonna go. So I'll choose C5, I'll go all the way down to M9. And I'm gonna choose no fill for this as such. And let's just extend this to column M as well. Okay, I'm gonna now do the same thing by just copying this range all the way through column AK as such. And tell you what, I'm also just gonna extend this to AL so that we have a little bit of a padding as such. Okay, so let's start now merging some of these cells. So I'm gonna take cells D5 through I6 and I'm gonna click merge as such. All right, then I'm gonna do the same thing over here. And this is gonna be where the actual status is gonna go. Then let's do the same thing for cells P6 through U8. That's gonna be where the text for the metrics at or above target are gonna go. And then right to the right of that is gonna be where the actual number is gonna go. All right, then we'll give a little bit of a buffer. And now I'll go from AA till AF. Let's merge this here. And then let's merge this over here as well. This is gonna be where the below target metrics and number is gonna go. And let's enter in this placeholder text. So I'll just say overall status, excellent. And then over here, I'll write metrics at or above target and metrics below target such. And I'll just populate an 8 and a 0. All right, now in cell C11, I'm just gonna populate the date. So June 2025 compared to May 2025. All right, so now let's outline the first KPI box. And the idea is that we're just gonna copy and paste this KPI box once it's outlined to all of the other ones. So we'll just design the first one for now. So I'm gonna start in cell C13 and we're gonna go down until J22 as such. And let's change this again to no fill. And now let's start again merging some cells. So this is gonna be where the KPI text is gonna go. All right, then over here is gonna be where the actual number is gonna go. And this is going to be where the comparison number is going to go. All right, then we need a place for status. So I'll merge the cells over here. And then finally, we need a helper text to understand what this metric actually relates to as such. So let's enter in those placeholder texts. I'll say sales, we'll say 1.08 million. And this is going to be 650K. Now I'm gonna put this little apostrophe here because if you don't put that apostrophe, Excel is gonna treat that as a special operator and it won't show the plus. But we're gonna fix that when we get our formulas anyway, but I'll just keep that as a placeholder. All right, so for this, I'm actually gonna unmerge these cells because I wanna break this up into 2 sets of merged cells. Here, I just wanna put status, then the actual status is gonna go over here. And I'll just write excellent. And then this is gonna say total income. Okay, now that we have our dashboard outline, let's make the design come to life with the principles that we just spoke about. So first thing I'm gonna do is set the font to Roboto, and I'm just gonna select the relevant cells. I'll hold down Control, and I'll type in Roboto. Now, some of these should be bolded. That's gonna be this, 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 and this.
So I'll just click on the bold. And now let's change the font size. So this over here is going to be 22. Then these cells over here are going to be a font size of 14. This is going to be a font size of 40. We'll make this a font size of 18. And this will be a font size of 10. All right, this is starting to come together. Let's now do the text color. So I'm going to select these two over here, and I'll select this color as such. Then let's set our company name to this color right here. We'll use that same color for this text as such. Then I'm going to select these cells over here, and let's change it to that. The same thing for this cell. Then this should be a lighter gray. And then this should be a very subtle gray. It should just blend right into the background. Okay, now for this over here and this over here, we're gonna be using conditional formatting later to set the colors. So we'll come back to that. Now let's set this over here to the green that we want. And then this over here will be the red that we want. Awesome. All right, now we have our colors set up. Our last step is the alignment. So I'm gonna select all of our cells except for these two here, and I'm going to align that middle. And by default, it should be aligned left. Now this over here, I do want to actually align back to middle. These over here, I want to wrap our text. Okay, then this, I just want to indent by a few. And then this, I will align center. Let's also give a little bit of breathing room to the status here. And then we could also align center both of these. And one more indent as such. Okay, this is coming together. Now notice in our dashboard that we have these neat shapes over here, and we have a few more over here, and then finally a shape around here. So let's actually apply that, and I'm gonna show you a pretty neat trick. First, I'm gonna go to Insert. We're gonna click on Shapes under Illustrations, and I'm gonna choose this rectangle with rounded corners. And let's just outline it around this over here. And I am going to make it no shape fill. And then for the shape outline, let's just make that one of our grays. And let's also change the weight on the gray to be a half as such. Okay, so it's kind of difficult to actually align this up, but if you go to shape format and then align, you can click snap to grid, which will then automatically try to find the best fit against our cells. So you see how it's easily doing that over here? So I'm just gonna button that up as such. Excellent. Now I could do the same thing over here. So I'm just gonna copy this as such, and I'm gonna drag this down. And again, maybe a little bit tough to see because I made it a light color, but if I go to view and then remove grid lines, you can see that it actually applied pretty nicely over there. All right, so let's continue by just taking this shape. I'll paste it over here to go around as such. And then I'll copy and paste that shape again to go around this. And let's just reduce the rounded edges so it just about fills the edge as such. All right, now let's just add some lines like that. Now the shape outline, we're just gonna make that a black, and the weight we're gonna again reduce. Let's see, is a half good? Yep, half looks pretty good. And then let's do the same thing. I'll just copy it over here and I'll bring this up as such. Perfect. Now we just need to do one more border around this over here, and we could extend this as such. All right, and I just want to actually reduce the size here to an 8. Excellent. All right, so now we can start making this all dynamic with our formulas. But before we do that, we need to talk about the key metrics that we want to include. And every company needs cash, whether that's from investors or lenders, or my favorite, customers. And the movement of that cash is called cash flows. And it's really just your ending bank balance less your balance at the beginning of the period. But cash flows isn't enough. Not long ago, I started working with a founder who had made a huge mistake. He wasn't tracking his cash balance and didn't realize he had less than 2 months of runway left. That put an enormous strain on his ability to make payroll, and in the end, he was forced to do a down round, raising money at a lower valuation, which his investors were really not happy about. So I saw from that experience firsthand how critical it is to always have a clear picture of your cash position. Tracking your cash out date may be the most important metric of everything we're gonna discuss. And it's really just the date when your cash balance is projected to go below 0. To get that, you can build a 3-statement model.
If you want to learn how to do that, you can take my course, where we'll build one together and cover my favorite financial modeling topics. But it's not enough to just look at cash flow or runway. You also need to know how much cash is available to spend today. For that, we use what's known as the working capital ratio. It's simply your current assets, what you'll turn into cash in the next 12 months, divided by current liabilities, or what you'll need to pay out in that same period. And of course, when we talk about cash from customers, we have a special word for that, sales. Or on a profit and loss statement, you may see the word revenue. But here's the thing, just because you have revenue doesn't mean you have cash. And even if you do have cash, what can be even more important is your margin or profit. So I like to analyze 3 levels of profitability. Gross margin, which tells you the percentage of profit on each sale after subtracting out your cost of goods sold. Operating margin, which is your operating income after expenses divided by sales. And finally, your net margin, which is your net income after all expenses and income divided by sales. These margins give you incredible insight into how efficiently you're running your business. But there's one last metric that to me is the most important, and it's why I'm always advocating for balance sheets. Let's say you're analyzing whether to invest in a business, and you find out that they generated over $1 million in net income last month, with the highest margins and the most incredible cash flows. Whoa, time to invest, right? Well, not so fast. What if I told you it took $1 billion of investment to get there? Investing $1 billion to generate $1 million would take you 1,000 months just to recoup your investment. That's why I always look at return on equity, and it's simple to calculate. Take your net income, divide it by the average owner's equity for the period, which is your beginning, plus ending balance, divided by 2. But while these metrics will tell you about the performance of your business, you need to benchmark these metrics to understand whether your business is in a good position or whether you're in trouble. And a lot of that is dependent on the type of business you're running. I had a chance to work with a lot of businesses in my career. My favorite industry by far is software as a service, because the margins and valuations are just incredible. But our accounting firm is what's known as a professional services company, which is where I work with the majority of my clients. And then there's also consumer packaged goods companies, which always keeps me on my toes because there's a heavy amount of inventory that you need to keep track of and forecast. And while all of these businesses can have different benchmarks, some of these benchmarks will be the same. So for sales or cash flows, that is entirely subjective on where you are in your business's journey. But if you're running out of cash in 3 months or less, that's a critical warning regardless of what type of business you operate. You really need to focus all your attention on getting more cash in the door. Most companies like to have at least 6 months of runway, while those in an excellent position have at least 12 months. When it comes to gross margin, SaaS companies are the best. That's because the only cost of goods sold is the hosting and servers for your application and maybe a little bit of customer support. Anything above 80% is excellent. Anything above 70% is good, and anything below 70% is pretty critical. It's very different for a professional services company like our accounting firm. Generally, anything above 50% is considered excellent. Anything above 40% is good, and anything below 30% is pretty bad. And CPG companies have the toughest margins. Typically, anything above 40% is excellent, anything above 20% is good, and anything below that is a critical warning. But of course, it could vary from company to company. Working capital can also differ between these 3 industries, and I find that both SaaS and professional services companies don't really need too much working capital. So their benchmarks can look like this, whereas with CPG, you need to have a lot of inventory on hand, which means you have a higher working capital need. Instead, your benchmarks can look like this. Now, for your operating margin, net margin, and return on equity, those are less dependent on the industry and more dependent on the stage of your business. For example, I work with a lot of early stage startups, so their operating and net margin is often really low or negative because they're really just reinvesting everything back into their growth. Late stage and mature businesses have positive and higher margins because they're more focused on returning the capital back to their investors. And that's similar for return on equity. It can be pretty volatile or negative for an early stage startup and often much more positive and stable for later stage businesses. And now that we have our key metrics and benchmarks, let's start entering that in our Excel file. So I created this table over here where we're gonna populate a lot of the information that's going to feed our dashboard. And let's just start by entering in the metrics that we spoke about. All right, now I'm gonna enter in the actual amounts that relate to my business. And in a few minutes, I'll show you how you can pull that directly from QuickBooks Online.
Okay, then the variance column will be pretty simple to calculate. I'm just gonna take my current minus my comparison as such, and let's just copy the formula down. All right, now I can start outlining what my critical and good benchmarks are. So I'll make this 450,000 and then 70%, and I'll just continue. Cool. And now we could introduce our formulas to make our dashboards dynamic. And we really just need 4 simple functions in order to accomplish this. The first one is one of the simplest functions, and that's going to be the if function. And the syntax is really simple. If the condition that we set is true, return the true value. Otherwise, return the false value. So let's actually do that in order to get the status for each of our metrics. So I'll write equals if, and my first condition is going to be if my current value over here is less than or equal to the critical value, then return critical. Then we're gonna nest another if function instead to evaluate the next condition. If current is less than or equal to the good, then write good. Otherwise, it must be greater than the critical and good, which means it should be returned as excellent. So I'm gonna write excellent. I'll close this parentheses and the next parentheses, and I hit enter. Okay, let's see if it's populating. Excellent, looks like it is as such. So if I just change this to our threshold of, let's say 450,000, now as you can see, it returns critical. Now I wanna link up this KPI box to the values shown in this table over here. And in order to do that, we need to use what's known as a lookup function. Now there are tons of lookup functions that Excel has available, but one of my favorite that we're going to use is XLOOKUP over here. So as you can see, it's pretty simple. We have a lookup value in the lookup array, and then we get the return array. So let me show you how simple that is to use. I'm gonna write over here equals XLOOKUP. Now my lookup value is going to be my metric right over here. I wanna look up that metric in this table as such. Now the return array is going to be the actual value that I wanna pull in as it corresponds to the position of my lookup value in my lookup array. So sales, as you can see, is my very first metric, which means we should return the very first number in the lookup array as such. Now I'm just going to hit F4 on both of these over here so that I could reuse this later. I'm gonna keep this without any $signs so that it could scale. All right, let me hit enter and see if this works. All right, looks like I pulled in that value. I can now just copy and paste this information over here. And instead of it pulling from the current column, I want it to pull from the variance column, which is gonna be AQ. So I'll change AO to AQ. And then the status, I wanna actually do the same. So again, I'm just gonna copy and paste that information. The status is found in column AT. And then I also wanna populate the description for how exactly this should be calculated. So let me actually just enter that in right now for each item here. Okay, so now that I have this information, let's again just copy our XLOOKUP function over here. And then once again, instead of the column that I have in the formula I copied, I'll change it to AW where the explanation shows as such. All right, let's just test this out to make sure that this works out. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna utilize data validation so that I can create a dropdown. Let me show you what I mean. I'm gonna go to data, and then this button right over here is gonna be data validation. I'm gonna choose list, and I'm gonna select all the values over here. All right, now my test is that if I change this, everything else should update. All right, it looks like it is. So I now wanna populate the overall status and the metrics at or above my target. And that's pretty simple to do. So over here, I have a table that shows the critical count, and I could enter in the status that should be returned based off of that critical count. So for example, if I have 0 critical counts, then I want that to return excellent. If I have 1 or 2, I'll return good. If I have 3 or more critical counts as a whole in my table, I want to return critical. So I'll just write critical as such. Okay, so now I want to get the count for each of these statuses. And it's really simple. I could use the COUNTIFs function, which works like this, equals COUNTIFs. Now I'm being asked for my criteria range. My criteria range is gonna be the status over here. And let's just lock that with F4. I'm going to say count if it equals to the status shown over here. So we have 0 critical, let's copy and paste. We have 3 good and we have 5 excellent. And again, if I just change this to 450,000, you'll see that everything dynamically updates as such. So to get my overall status, I could really just use another XLOOKUP. Check it out. All right, equals XLOOKUP. And I want to look up whatever the count is over here for critical as it relates to whatever count I have in this matrix over here. And I'll lock that as such. And then I'll return the actual status over here. And let's lock it again. Perfect. So as you can see, my status is excellent. Now for my metrics at or above target, I could simply utilize a sum for both of these values over here. And then for the metrics below target, I could simply point to the critical as such. All right, so it looks like everything here is dynamic, but there's just one problem. Notice how the actual metric over here is pretty unformatted with a number. And again, if I change this to, let's say this over here, it just goes to a number instead of a percentage. Wouldn't it be really cool if I could actually format things accordingly based off of the value? So if I flip back to our finish dashboard, watch what happens when I change sales to gross margin or to cash flows. Notice how the number formatting is automatically updating. Well, in order to accomplish that, I could utilize the text function. And the text function is really simple. It just takes 2 arguments, the value and then the format for the text. So in this example, I'm formatting things for 1,000 operators as such, and you can see that as I toggle to millions, everything updates or thousands accordingly. So before we implement our text function, let's just do a really quick deep dive on how these formats work. So first, you can get to custom formatting by either hitting Control-1 and then clicking on Custom, or you can go on the home ribbon and just click any of these buttons over here, and again, click on Custom as such. And here's the general premise. See, custom formatting won't change the actual value of the cell. It'll only change the way the cell appears when it's read, or the format of that cell. And what's really cool about custom formatting is you could even set rules. So for example, you can set how you want it to appear if it's a positive value, how you want your number to appear if it's a negative value or a 0 value as such. And to understand the syntax, let's take a date, for example. So let's say it was 6/30/2025. If you set the custom format to say mm/dd/YYYY, it'll appear as such. Notice how each of these formats then change the way that the text will actually appear. And if we apply that to numbers, if I just put a hash sign followed by a comma, 2 hashes and a 0, it'll always include a 0 with a comma as such. Now, all of these other formats will return all these other values. You could even include colors, which is pretty neat. And then this is extra relevant to what we're going to do. You can put a K if it's in thousands, or an M if it's in millions, or even a B if it's in billions. And then for percentages, you have this summary over here. So let's enter in the format that we want for our current value. And for that, I'm gonna write a hash 0.0 and then another hash. Then I'll put 2 commas for millions, quotations, and then M. Now, this is how I want it to appear if it's a positive value, but remember, if it's negative, I also want it to dynamically show. So I'm just gonna hit a semicolon to distinguish between the two. I'll open the parentheses and then I will close the parentheses afterwards as such. Okay, so let's see if this will now work. I'm gonna, again, just wrap this text function as such. So I'm pulling in the correct value, but now I'm gonna use another XLOOKUP to look up the format over here in column AU. And let's see if this works. Let's close the text function and check it out. Looks like it does. Okay, now let's populate the variance over here. And for that, I wanna show a plus if it's positive, and I'll keep the parentheses as such if it's negative, because I wanna really show the delta. So in this case, we have thousands. So I'm going to write plus hash, and this time I only need 1 comma because it's in thousands. I'll put in quotations this K, and then I will put the negative value. And I just need to put, again, that apostrophe because the plus is a special operator in Excel. Okay, so now let's see. Can I take this information over here? Can I copy it? And now, instead of pulling in the current, I, again, am gonna change that to AQ. And that's for the first argument in the text function. And then instead of pulling in the format for the current, I'm gonna change that to AV, the second argument in the text function as such. All right, check it out. Looks like it works. Now, even better would be if I could set a formula that'll automatically populate what this format should be in these cells, depending on what the value is. Now, this video is already getting pretty long, so I'm just gonna show you a really quick snippet of how I did that. I used the let function and I defined my value and said, if the absolute over here is less than 1, then return the percentage value. If it's less than 100,000, return the number. And if it's less than 1,000,000, return the thousands, otherwise return in millions. But I'm gonna speed this up by just entering in all the values directly over here instead. And you could always download the spreadsheet to see how I'm doing that. Okay, now here comes our test. Does this actually work? Does everything update whenever I change this to, let's say, gross margin, or to cash flows, or even to our cash out as such? Check it out, it does. That's really neat. Now, the last thing that we want to do is apply this color formatting over here so that if it is good or excellent or critical, everything will update. And for that, we're going to utilize conditional formatting. Now, if you haven't used conditional formatting, it's one of my favorite tools that Excel offers. You can highlight cells if it contains a specific text, or if it's above or below a certain value, which I oftentimes do in order to highlight good and bad variances. You could also highlight duplicate text or a top or bottom percentage that you set. You could also set color scales or data bars like you see over here. And it's not only background colors, it's also icons, as you can see over here. And then lastly, which is what we're gonna do here, you can set a custom formula. So you can write whatever formula you want and tell Excel to format your cells with conditional formatting based off that custom formula. And this was actually something that I was really confused with at first until I realized how simple it is. So let's take an example here. I have a sales list for all of my customers, I wish, and I want to highlight whether the amount from one month to the next went down compared to the month prior. So in order to do that, watch what I'm gonna do. I'm first just gonna set up a new table that evaluates to true or false for the condition that I want. Now the table has to be the same size. So I'm gonna write equals, this is less than this as such. And then let me just copy and paste this all the way down. So as you can see, in this case, 15,000 was less than 17,000. And then over here, as you can see, 0 was less than 6,300 and so forth. So in order to set the custom rule for my conditional formatting, I'm just gonna take my top leftmost cell. I'm gonna select this entire range over here. I'll click on conditional formatting. I'll then click on new rule, use a formula, and I'll enter in this value over here. So now for format, I'm just gonna change that to be a light red background as such, and I'll click OK. And there you go. Now you can see that conditionally with the formula that I just set, entirely custom, I have my values populating. So that's exactly what we're gonna do now for over here. I'm gonna wanna evaluate what is the value over here for both of these cells and set that to the applicable background color and text color. So I'm just gonna show you what that looks like over here. If F19 is equal to critical, then set this background color and text color. And I really just repeated that for all of these different conditions as such. And that got me to populating this accordingly. So let's set up the conditional formatting together, and we're gonna do these cells separately. So first I'm gonna say new rule, use a formula, and I'm going to point to F19. I'm gonna undo the dollar signs here, and I'm gonna say equals excellent. All right, now for the format, I'm gonna go to fill, I'm gonna choose more colors. I'll then go to custom, and I'm gonna use this code over here. All right, let's click OK, and let's click OK. Awesome. Now it looks like that worked. So I'm now gonna repeat that same step. I'm gonna go to new rule, use a formula to determine, and I'm going to say that this cell over here equals excellent. And then if that is the case, just change the fill color as such. Okay, so if that worked, I should now be able to just change this. And this is still excellent. Well, this is good, and it went back over here to 0 as such. So now we can see that the colors are conditionally changing. And I'm just gonna speed up as I apply all of this here to both this text over here, as well as the overall status. All right, now that I have my conditional formatting set, if I did everything correctly, I should be able to just copy this KPI box, change the metric, and everything will dynamically populate. Let's see what happens when I do that. So I'm just gonna copy this over here, and I will paste. All right, now let's select all of these cells over here, and let's do the same thing. And let's now just change our values. Amazing, and it looks like everything is updating. Man, that is so cool. We completed the dashboard, but you're probably now wondering, how can I actually link in my data? Well, watch how simple it is to do that. Watch, I'm gonna go to my home ribbon and I installed this tool, Model Wiz over here, and you can find that directly from the Microsoft App Store or from our website at Model Wiz. Now I'm just gonna click on forecast templates and I'm gonna scroll down until we get to this template over here. Now watch what happens when I actually download the information. This is so crazy, and this honestly took our team 5 years in order just to be able to build. Right now, it's going to my QuickBooks Online account. It's fetching all of my information, bringing it into this file, reshaping, transforming all that data, and then in a sec, you'll see that it's gonna be connected directly to this dashboard. And there we go. See, the information now is fully populated directly from my actual accounting software. And I could even just like change the dates, and all the information, as you can see, automatically updates. And if that isn't enough, I could actually just create an entire financial model from scratch by clicking this button over here. And now instead of just creating this dashboard, it'll create a full 3-statement model with my income statement, balance sheet, and cash flows linked together. And now I have a full 3-statement model over here with an income statement, balance sheet, and cash flows, and some other really neat dashboards over here. And what's really cool is I could just select this information, click this little screenshot icon, and then put this directly in an email. Or I could even take it one step further. I could just hit this export to PDF button over here, and it's gonna now pull all the relevant dashboards from my financial model and put it into a PDF. And check it out, right over here now, I have my PDF. I could share this with the CEO or the board of directors or even upcoming investors, and everything is just dialed in. I could also do a refresh each month, which will detect any new accounts that'll take place. Now you can try us out entirely for free with a 2-week trial at modelwiz.com. Now we covered a ton in this Excel masterclass, so let's just do a really quick recap on everything we spoke about in this video. We started off designing our dashboard, and we spoke about the importance of starting with a mockup before you build anything in Excel. To create a beautiful mockup, there's balance, contrast, and alignment. And the best dashboards have a cohesive color scheme with the right typography. After we designed our dashboard, we outlined the key metrics that we care about in our business. Now, these are just the metrics that I chose for my business. You may want to choose something entirely different and then set them to your own benchmarks so you can instantly be notified if you're in trouble or if everything is great. We then linked up our information dynamically using some of my favorite functions: the if function, XLOOKUP, COUNTIFs, and text. And what's so cool about the text function is you can change the format of your cells dynamically. And Excel gives you tons of flexibility with controlling the format. But it gets even more powerful when you layer on conditional formatting. We spoke about how you can create a custom rule to set up that conditional formatting to whatever you wanted. And if you made it this far in the video, and if you're able to recreate this dashboard yourself, give yourself a huge pat on the back, because these principles are incredibly powerful and lucrative. And you've proven that you're really serious about creating the ultimate dashboard. So because of that, you should click on this video right over here, where I'll show you how to create a one-click ultimate dashboard. I'm Josh, your CFO guy, and I'll catch you in the next one.